Zeph pressed his blue face against the shuttle window as the Galactic University came into view. The massive station floated in space like a crystal flower, its many sections spinning slowly to create gravity for different species. His 3 hearts beat faster with excitement and fear. This was his first time leaving his home world of Vraxia Prime. The shuttle docked with a soft bump. Zeph picked up his travel bag and followed the other students through the airlock. The air tasted different here, recycled and filtered for many different species to breathe. He wrinkled his nose at the strange mix of smells. First time off-world? Asked a voice behind him. Zeph turned to see a tall creature with pink skin and brown fur on top of its head. The being wore simple clothes and carried a worn backpack. Zeph recognized it as a human, one of the Deathworld species he had read about in his preparation files. "Yes," Zeph replied in careful galactic standard. "I am Zeph from Vraxia Prime. You are human, correct?" The human smiled, showing white teeth. "That's right. I'm Jake Miller from Earth. Nice to meet you, Zeph." He extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. Zeph touched it briefly, surprised by how warm the human skin felt. They walked together through the station corridors. Jake pointed out different areas as they passed. "That's the cafeteria they serve food from. About 50 different worlds. The blue section is for water-breathing species. And over there is the gym where the heavy gravity folks work out." Zeph nodded, trying to take it all in. Everything seemed so casual to Jake, but to Zeph it was overwhelming. On Vraxia Prime, everyone was the same species. Everyone breathed the same air and ate the same food. Here, creatures from dozens of worlds lived and studied together. They reached the dormitory section. Jake helped Zeph find his room and get his door code working. "I'm just down the hall if you need anything," Jake said. "What classes are you taking?" "I am studying galactic biology with a focus on extreme environments," Zeph replied. "My professor is Kelvin." Jake's eyes lit up. "No way. That's my professor too. I'm in the same class. Looks like we might be study partners." The next morning, Zeph entered the classroom early. The room was designed to accommodate many different species, with seats of various sizes and atmosphere controls for each section. He chose a spot in the Vraxian-compatible zone and activated his personal air filter. Other students filed in. Tall Altarians with their silver skin, short goblin-like Phrexians, and a few other species Zeph didn't recognize. Jake entered and waved at Zeph. Before sitting in the human section nearby, Professor Kelvin entered the room. The old Altarian skin had turned almost white with age, and his 4 arms moved gracefully as he arranged his teaching materials. "Welcome, students, to Extreme Environment Survival. This course will teach you how to survive on worlds that are hostile to life." The professor activated a holographic display showing different planets. "We will study Class 8 through Class 12. Worlds. These are planets with dangerous conditions that require special equipment and training to survive." A Phrexian student raised her hand. "Professor, what about Class 13 worlds? Are those too dangerous to study?" Professor Kelvin's expression grew serious. "Class 13 worlds are considered unsurvivable for extended periods. They have multiple extreme conditions that can kill most species within hours. We do not typically send students to such places." The professor paused and looked around the room. "However, this semester we have a special opportunity. The Galactic Science Council has approved a field study mission to Kepler 438c, a Class 13 world. This will be your final project." The reaction was immediate. Several students gasped. A Phrexian made a high-pitched whining sound. One of the Altarians stood up and said, "Professor, surely you cannot be serious. A Class 13 world will kill us all." Zeph felt his 3 hearts racing. He had read about Class 13 worlds in his preparation studies. They were described as hell planets, with conditions so extreme that even thinking about them made most species uncomfortable. His people had never set foot on anything more dangerous than a Class 6 world. "I understand your concerns," Professor Kelvon said calmly. "That is why this mission is optional. Any student who chooses not to participate will complete an alternative project." More students began talking at once, their voices mixing in panic. Some were already talking about dropping the class. Others were discussing whether they should contact their families for advice. In the middle of all this chaos, Jake raised his hand casually. "Professor, how long will we be on the planet?" 3 days, the professor replied. Jake nodded. "Okay, should we bring extra water bottles? And maybe some good hiking boots?" The classroom fell silent. Everyone stared at Jake. Zeph couldn't believe what he had just heard. A Class 13 world was described in the textbooks as having extreme temperature variations, violent weather systems, predatory flora, toxic atmospheric pockets, and unstable geological activity. And the human was asking, "About water bottles and boots?" "Mr. Miller," Professor Kelvon said slowly, "you do understand that Kepler 438c is classified as a Class 13 death world?" Jake shrugged. "Yeah, I read the briefing. Sounds like it might be a bit rough, but nothing we can't handle with proper preparation. I've been camping in places on Earth that sound pretty similar." A Phyrexian student named Grix Tal turned to stare at Jake. "Are you insane? That planet will kill us all within the first day." "I don't think so," Jake said mildly. "I mean, it's not going to be comfortable, but people survive in tough places all the time. My dad took me camping in Death Valley when I was 12. That was pretty hot and dry, but we made it through fine." Zeph found himself unable to speak. He had researched Earth as part of his preparation for meeting humans. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, just one step below the planet they were being asked to visit. But Jake talked about it like it was nothing special. "Your homeworld is a Class 12 death world," whispered an Altarian student. "How? Do you people survive there?" Jake looked confused. "I don't know. We just do. I mean, you have to be careful about things like extreme weather and dangerous animals, but that's just normal life." Normal life, Zeph felt dizzy. What Jake described as normal life would be a nightmare for most species in the galaxy. And now this human was treating a Class 13 world like it was just another camping trip. Professor Kelvon cleared his throat. "We will spend the next 2 weeks preparing for this mission. Mr. Miller, since you seem confident about this undertaking, would you be willing to assist other students with survival preparation?" "Sure," Jake said easily. "I'd be happy to help." As the class ended, students filed out in small groups, talking in worried whispers. Zeph stayed in his seat, trying to process what he had just experienced. Jake walked over to him. "Hey, you okay? You look a little pale. Well, more pale than usual." Zeph looked up at the human. "Jake, are you not afraid of this Class 13 planet?" Jake thought for a moment. "I'm not going to lie. It sounds challenging, but fear doesn't help much in situations like this. Better to focus on preparation and staying alert. Besides, we'll have good equipment and each other to rely on." Zeph stared at him. On Vraxia Prime, the most dangerous thing anyone ever encountered was a mild rainstorm. The idea of voluntarily going to a world that could kill him in dozens of different ways was terrifying. But Jake spoke about it like he was planning a picnic. "Would you like to be study partners for this project?" Jake asked. "I could show you some basic survival techniques that might help." Zeph nodded slowly. He had a feeling he was going to learn much more than just survival techniques from this human. He was going to learn what it really meant to come from a death world. As they walked out of the classroom together, Zeph couldn't stop thinking about Jake's casual attitude. Either humans were completely insane, or they knew something about survival that the rest of the galaxy had never learned. Given that humans had made it off their death world and into space, Zeph suspected it might be the latter. This was going to be a very interesting semester. The next morning, Zeph knocked on Jake's door. He had spent the entire night reading about Class 13 worlds, and the more he learned, the more terrified he became. The door slid open, and Jake greeted him with a smile. "Hey, Zeph. Ready for some survival prep?" Zeph stepped into Jake's room and immediately noticed how different it was from his own. While Zeph's room was filled with advanced technology and comfort items from home, Jake's room looked almost primitive. There were simple tools scattered on the desk, clothes that looked designed for rough use, and strange devices Zeph didn't recognize. "What are those?" Zeph asked, pointing to a pair of heavy, worn objects near the door. "Those are my hiking boots," Jake said, picking one up. "I've had them for about 3 years. They've been through a lot of rough terrain back home." He showed Zeph the thick sole and sturdy construction. Good boots can mean the difference between life and death in dangerous places. Zeph examined the boot. It was made of some kind of animal hide and synthetic materials. By galactic standards, it looked incredibly primitive. Most species used advanced force field footwear that adapted to any surface automatically. But why not use adaptive footwear? Zeph asked. "It would be much more efficient." Jake laughed. "I tried those once on a camping trip. They failed when the battery died, and I ended up walking barefoot for 6 miles. These boots don't need power, they don't break down, and they'll protect my feet no matter what." Jake pulled out a large bag and started showing Zeph its contents. There were metal tools, rope, containers for water, and packages of food. Everything looked simple and durable. "This is my survival kit," Jake explained. "I always keep it ready. Most of this stuff is based on designs that humans have used for thousands of years." Zeph picked up a small metal device. "What does this do?" "It's a knife. You can use it to cut things, prepare food, make other tools, or defend yourself if necessary." Jake took it and demonstrated how it folded and unfolded. "My grandfather gave this to me when I was 10. He said every person should know how to use basic tools." "Your grandfather gave you a weapon when you were a child?" Zeph asked, shocked. Jake looked confused. "It's not really a weapon. I mean, it could be used as one, but it's mainly just a tool. Kids on Earth start learning to use knives pretty young. It's basic survival stuff." Zeph was beginning to understand just how different human childhood was from his own. On Vraxia Prime, children were kept safe from anything that could possibly hurt them. The idea of giving a 10-year-old a sharp metal tool was unthinkable. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" Zeph said. "Sure." "What was it like growing up on Earth? I have read that it is a Class 12 death world, but you speak of it so casually." Jake sat down on his bed and thought for a moment. "I guess I never really thought about it being a death world. It's just home. But yeah, there are things you have to be careful about. Weather can kill you if you're not prepared. There are animals that can be dangerous. Some plants are poisonous. Natural disasters happen." "And this was normal for you?" "Well, yeah. My parents taught me about these things from when I was little. We'd go camping and they'd show me how to find safe water, how to build shelter, how to avoid dangerous animals. It was just part of growing up." Zeph tried to imagine this. "Your parents deliberately took you to dangerous places as a child?" "They took me to places where I could learn important skills," Jake corrected. "My dad always said that the best way to stay safe is to understand danger and know how to handle it. We started with easy trips when I was young, then gradually went to more challenging places as I got older." Jake stood up and walked to his desk. He picked up a small device that looked like it was made from metal and wood. This is a compass. It uses Earth's magnetic field to show direction. It doesn't need power, and it'll work anywhere there's a magnetic field. But why not use a GPS device? Zeph asked. I have one of those too, Jake said, pulling out a more familiar-looking device. But electronics can fail. Batteries die. Satellites can be blocked. This compass will work even if every piece of advanced technology fails. Zeph was starting to see a pattern. Jake had two versions of almost everything, an advanced version and a simple backup. It was like he expected technology to fail. Jake, do you not trust advanced technology? I trust it when it works, Jake said. But I've seen too many situations where someone was completely helpless because their technology failed, and they didn't know how to do things the old-fashioned way. My uncle got lost in the mountains once because his GPS broke, and he had no idea how to navigate without it. What happened to him? He died, Jake said simply. That's when my family decided that everyone needed to learn basic survival skills. Just in case. Zeph felt a chill. Jake spoke about his uncle's death with sadness, but also with a matter-of-fact acceptance that shocked Zeph. On Vraxia Prime, accidental deaths were almost unknown. The idea that someone could die just from getting lost was terrifying. I'm sorry about your uncle, Zeph said. Thanks. He was a good man. But his death taught the rest of us an important lesson about being prepared. Jake looked at Zeph seriously. That's why I'm not worried about this Class 13 planet. I've been preparing for situations like this my whole life. That afternoon, they met with Professor Kelvan and the other students who had decided to join the mission. Out of the original 23 students in the class, only 8 were going to Kepler 438c. The others had chosen the alternative project. Today, we will review the equipment you will be using, Professor Kelvan announced. He activated a holographic display showing various pieces of technology. Each student will have a personal environmental suit, emergency beacon, food synthesizer, and shelter generator. Jake raised his hand. Professor, what happens if the power systems fail? The equipment has backup power systems, the professor replied. They are designed to last for 5 days minimum. But what if something happens to the backup systems too? Several students looked at Jake like he was crazy. Why would someone assume the backup systems would fail? Professor Kelvan paused. That is ... unlikely. These systems are tested extensively. I'm sure they are, Jake said politely. But I'd like to bring some basic backup equipment, just in case. Simple tools that don't require power. What kind of tools? Asked Grixtal, the Phyrexian student. Jake pulled out his survival kit. Things like this. Manual tools, basic shelter materials, emergency food that doesn't need to be synthesized. The other students examined Jake's equipment with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. To them, it looked like museum pieces, relics from a time before advanced technology. This food is just ... dried plant matter, observed an Altarian student named Velko. How can this provide proper nutrition? It's called jerky and trail mix, Jake explained. Humans have been preserving food like this for thousands of years. It's lightweight, doesn't spoil, and gives you the energy you need. Jake opened one of the packages and offered some to the group. Most students declined, but Zeph tried a small piece. It was salty and chewy, with a strong flavor unlike anything he had ever tasted. It's not bad, Zeph said, surprised. My mom made that batch, Jake said with a smile. She's been making trail food for family camping trips since I was little. Your mother makes food manually? Velko asked. Does she not have access to food synthesizers? We have those too, Jake replied. But sometimes the old ways work better. This food will last for years without spoiling. and it doesn't need any technology to prepare or eat. Professor Kelvin had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. Mr. Miller, would you be willing to demonstrate some of these techniques to the other students? It might be valuable for them to understand alternative methods. Sure, Jake said. How about I show everyone how to make a basic shelter without power tools? They moved to a larger room where Jake used simple materials to construct a small shelter. He worked quickly and efficiently, explaining each step. The other students watched in fascination as he created something that looked crude but functional. This type of shelter can be built in about an hour using materials you can find almost anywhere, Jake explained. It'll keep you dry and help retain body heat. It's not comfortable, but it can keep you alive. Zeph found himself taking notes. Everything Jake did seemed to have a purpose, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. The human's approach to survival was completely different from anything Zeph had learned. Jake, Zeph said later as they walked back to their rooms, why do humans know so much about survival? Other species rely on technology for safety. Jake thought about this. I think it's because Earth is such a dangerous place. For most of human history, we didn't have advanced technology. We had to learn to survive using just our intelligence and simple tools. Those skills got passed down through generations. But surely now that humans have advanced technology, these skills are not needed. Jake shook his head. My dad always said that the skills that kept humans alive for thousands of years don't become useless just because we invented better tools. Technology can fail, but knowledge and skills stay with you. That night, Zeph couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Jake had said about humans learning to survive on Earth for thousands of years. Most species had developed advanced technology early in their history and used it to maw. The shuttle shook violently as it entered Kepler 438c's atmosphere. Zeph gripped his seat and tried not to think about all the ways they could die in the next few minutes. Across from him, Jake was calmly checking his equipment one more time. Atmospheric. Entry is always rough on Class 13 worlds, Professor Kelvin announced over the intercom. The weather systems are highly unstable. Through the small window, Zeph could see the planet's surface approaching. It looked like a nightmare. Dark clouds swirling over rocky terrain, with flashes of lightning illuminating a landscape that seemed hostile to all life. Landing in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. The shuttle hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before coming to a stop. The engines powered down, and suddenly everything was quiet, except for the sound of wind howling outside. Welcome to Kepler 438c, Professor Kelvin said. External temperature is currently minus 15 degrees Celsius. Wind speed is 40 kilometers per hour. The atmospheric pressure is within acceptable ranges for your suits. Zeph activated his environmental suit and felt the familiar hum of the climate control system. The suit was supposed to keep him comfortable in almost any environment. As the shuttle door opened, he followed the others outside. The wind hit them immediately, even through their suits. Zeph's climate control system worked harder to maintain comfortable temperature. The landscape was even more hostile than it had looked from space. Jagged rocks, patches of ice, and strange plants that seemed to move in the wind. The extraction point is 12 kilometers from here, Professor Kelvin explained. We will establish a base camp, then conduct our research over the next 3 days. The group began walking across the rocky terrain. Within the first hour, problems started. Velko's suit began making warning sounds. The climate control was struggling with the extreme conditions. Grixtal's food synthesizer failed when dust got into the air filters. This is normal, Jake said when Zeph mentioned the equipment failures. Advanced technology doesn't like extreme environments. That's why I brought backups. Jake seemed completely unbothered by the hostile conditions. While other students struggled with their equipment, he moved across the difficult terrain with confidence. His simple clothing under the environmental suit didn't look like much, but it seemed to be working. "Fine. How are you so comfortable?" Zeph asked as they climbed over a pile of sharp rocks. "I grew up in the Rocky Mountains," Jake replied. "This reminds me of winter camping trips. The gravity is a bit lighter than Earth, and the air is thinner, but the basic challenges are the same." Zeph looked around at the deadly landscape. "This reminds you of home?" "Parts of it, yeah. The rock formations are similar to some places in Colorado. The weather is like a bad storm in the mountains. And these plants ... double quotes Jake stopped to examine a bush covered in sharp thorns. "They're not too different from some of the desert plants. In Arizona, a plant that looked like it wanted to kill everything around it reminded Jake of home." Zeph was starting to understand just how dangerous Earth must be. They reached the planned campsite as the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind was getting stronger. Professor Kelvon activated the automated shelter generator. Nothing happened. "The unit appears to be malfunctioning," the professor said, checking his equipment. "The extreme conditions may have damaged the power systems." Several students began to panic. Without the shelter generator, they would be exposed to the harsh environment all night. The temperature was expected to drop to -30 degrees, and there were reports of acid rain in the area. "No problem," Jake said calmly. "I can build you as a shelter." While the others stood around looking worried, Jake began collecting materials. He gathered rocks, pieces of metal from the shuttle's external panels, and some of the local plant material. Within an hour, he had constructed a crude but functional shelter. "It's not pretty, but it'll keep us alive," Jake said as he finished. "The design is based on shelters that Arctic explorers used on Earth. It'll hold up to the wind and keep most of the heat in." The other students looked at the shelter with doubt. It was clearly primitive compared to their advanced technology. But as the night got colder and their personal heating systems began to struggle, they were grateful for Jake's simple construction. "How did you learn to build this?" Zeph asked as they settled in for the night. "My grandfather taught me," Jake replied. "He was in the Earth military and spent time in some pretty rough places. He always said that survival skills were more important than fancy equipment, because equipment can break, but knowledge stays with you." During the night, the acid rain started. It was a light shower, but it was enough to damage several pieces of electronic equipment. Jake's shelter kept most of it out, though they could hear it hitting the roof. "Jake," Velko said quietly, "your equipment is not affected by the acid rain." "Some of it is treated to resist corrosion," Jake replied. "But mostly I just try to keep things covered and dry. Basic maintenance goes a long way." Zeph listened to the conversation and realized something important. Jake wasn't just prepared for this specific planet. He was prepared for the general concept of things going wrong. His entire approach to survival was based on the assumption that problems would happen. The next morning brought new challenges. The weather had shifted, and now it was hot, over 40 degrees Celsius. The sudden temperature change caused more equipment failures. Grixtal's water recycling system stopped working. 2 other students had problems with their cooling systems. "This is normal for extreme environments," Jake explained as he shared his water supply. "Big temperature swings put stress on equipment. That's why I always carry extra water and basic cooling gear." Jake showed them how to use simple techniques to stay cool, finding shade, using wet cloth to help with evaporation, and adjusting their activity levels to avoid overheating. These were all things that humans had learned to do long before they had advanced technology. On Earth, people live in deserts where temperatures can reach 50 degrees during the day and drop below freezing at night. Jake said, "You learn to adapt." As they continued their research mission, Zeph began to notice a pattern. Every time something went wrong, Jake had either anticipated it or knew how to deal with it. When the GPS system failed, Jake used a simple compass and paper map. When the emergency beacon got damaged, Jake improvised a signal system using mirrors and sunlight. "Jake, it is like you expected all of this to go wrong," Zeph observed. "I did," Jake replied honestly. "When you're going into a dangerous environment, you have to assume that things will go wrong. That's just basic survival planning." "But the equipment was tested extensively," Velko said. "It should have worked." "Testing in a lab is different from real-world conditions," Jake explained. "No amount of testing can account for every possible problem. That's why humans developed the concept of redundancy, having multiple ways to accomplish the same task." That evening, as they prepared to spend their second night on the planet, Zeph found himself watching Jake more closely. The human's movements were efficient and purposeful. He never seemed to waste energy or make unnecessary motions. Even his rest periods were planned to maximize recovery while staying alert to potential dangers. "Jake, can I ask you something?" Zeph said. "Sure. Are you afraid of anything?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "Of course I am. Fear is a useful emotion. It keeps you alert and helps you avoid dangerous situations. But I've learned that fear works best when you channel it into preparation and caution rather than panic." "What kinds of things scare you?" "Uncontrolled situations. Times when I don't have enough information to make good decisions. Being responsible for other people's safety." Jake looked around at the group, like right now, actually. "I'm worried about keeping everyone safe until we get picked up." Zeph was surprised. Jake had seemed so confident and in control that Zeph had assumed he wasn't afraid of anything. Learning that Jake was scared but still functional was somehow more impressive than if he had been fearless. "On Vraxia Prime, we avoid dangerous situations," Zeph said. "We have built our society to be as safe as possible. The idea of deliberately going into danger is difficult for me to understand." "That makes sense," Jake said. "But humans learned that sometimes you can't avoid danger. Sometimes it comes to you whether you want it or not. So we figured it was better to understand how to handle it." As they settled in for another night in Jake's improvised shelter, Zeph realized that he was seeing something remarkable. Jake wasn't just a skilled survivor. He was a representative of an entire species that had learned to live with danger as a normal part of life. The other students were beginning to understand this too. They had stopped questioning Jake's methods and started asking him to teach them. Even Professor Kelvon was taking notes on Jake's techniques. "Mr. Miller," the professor said, "I believe your approach to survival may be worth studying. Would you be willing to share some of your knowledge with the broader galactic community?" Jake looked surprised. "I'm not really an expert or anything. This is just basic stuff that most humans learn growing up." "Basic to humans, perhaps," the professor replied, "but revolutionary to the rest of us." As Zeph fell asleep listening to the wind outside their shelter, he couldn't help but think about the implications. If Jake's The ground began shaking just after dawn on their third day. Zeph woke to the sound of rocks falling and Jake's voice calling for everyone to get outside the shelter immediately. "Earthquake!" Jake shouted. "Everyone out now." The group stumbled out of the shelter just as a massive tremor shook the entire area. Zeph watched in horror as the ground cracked open in several places, releasing clouds of toxic-looking steam. Their shuttle, which had been parked nearby, tilted sideways as the ground beneath it shifted. "The extraction point," Professor Kelvon said, checking his instruments. "The seismic activity has made it unsafe for landing. Our pickup has been delayed indefinitely." Another tremor hit, this one stronger than the first. A section of cliff face broke away and crashed down where their shelter had been just moments before. If Jake hadn't woken them and gotten them out, they would all be dead. "How did you know?" Zeph asked, his voice shaking. The animals, Jake replied, pointing to some small creatures that were running away from the area. They were acting strange, and I could feel minor tremors through the ground. My dad taught me to pay attention to warning signs like that. Velko was frantically trying to use his communication device. The seismic activity is interfering with our signals. I cannot contact the rescue team. The shuttle's communication system is damaged too, Professor Kelvon reported. A falling rock hit the antenna array. Zeph felt panic rising in his chest. They were stranded on a Class 13 Deathworld, with no way to call for help. Their advanced technology was failing, and their shelter was destroyed. Several students were already talking about how they were going to die. Okay, everyone calm down, Jake said firmly. Panic won't help us. We need to assess our situation and make a plan. Jake moved through the group, checking on everyone's condition and taking inventory of their remaining supplies. He worked methodically, like he had done this before. Here's what we know, Jake said after completing his assessment. We have enough food and water for about 4 days if we're careful. Most of our electronic equipment is damaged, but we still have some basic tools. The extraction point is compromised, but there should be alternative landing sites. How can you be so calm? Rickstahl asked. We are all going to die here. We're not going to die, Jake said with quiet confidence. But we need to work together and stay focused. First, we need to find a safer location. This area is still experiencing seismic activity. Jake led them away from the unstable ground, moving carefully across the rocky terrain. He seemed to know exactly where to go, avoiding areas that looked dangerous and finding the safest path forward. How do you know which way to go? Zeph asked. Basic geology, Jake replied. I'm looking at the rock formations and terrain features to find areas that are less likely to have more earthquakes. Also, I'm keeping track of our position relative to where we started so we don't get lost. They traveled for several hours before Jake found a location he considered safe. A flat area surrounded by stable rock formations, with access to water from a small stream. The water would need to be purified, but it was better than relying entirely on their dwindling supplies. We'll make camp here, Jake announced. This location gives us several advantages: stable ground, water source, and good visibility in all directions. Jake began constructing another shelter using materials he found in the area. This one was more sophisticated than the first, with better insulation and multiple exits in case they needed to leave quickly. While I work on shelter, I need everyone else to gather specific materials, Jake said, giving each person a task. Velko, collect dry wood and plant material for fuel. Grixtal, find rocks about this size for construction. Professor, can you help me identify which local plants might be edible? Zeph watched in amazement as Jake organized the group into an efficient survival team. Everyone had something productive to do, which helped reduce the panic. Even more impressive was how Jake seemed to know exactly what they needed and where to find it as they worked. Zeph began to understand something important about Jake's approach. The human wasn't just surviving. He was creating a system that would let them thrive even in this hostile environment. Every decision Jake made seemed to account for multiple problems that might happen later. Jake, how do you know all of this? Zeph asked as he helped gather materials. My family has been teaching survival skills for generations, Jake replied. My great-grandfather was a mountain guide. My grandfather was military. My father is a park ranger. They all made sure I learned the basics. But this planet is completely different from Earth. The specific challenges are different, but the principles are the same, Jake explained. Find shelter, secure water, maintain warmth, stay oriented. Those needs are universal. By evening, they had a functional camp. Jake had built a shelter that could house all of them, established a clean water source, and created a fire that would burn throughout the night. He had even identified several local plants that were safe to eat, supplementing their dwindling food supplies. How did you know those plants were safe? Professor Kelvin asked. I tested them carefully, Jake replied. There are universal indicators for plant toxicity that work on most worlds. Color patterns, smell, texture. Then you test small amounts and wait to see if there are negative reactions. You experimented on yourself? Velko asked, horrified. Someone had to, Jake said simply. And I have the most experience with survival situations. If anyone was going to take that risk, it should be me. Zeph realized that Jake had been quietly taking risks to keep the rest of them safe. While they had been focused on their immediate fears, Jake had been thinking several steps ahead, making sure they would have what they needed to survive. On their second night at the new camp, the real test came. A pack of local predators found them. Zeph was awakened by a low growling sound outside the shelter. Through a small opening, he could see several large creatures circling their camp. They looked like a cross between wolves and lizards, with sharp teeth and claws designed for killing. Everyone stay calm and quiet, Jake whispered. Don't make any sudden movements. What are those things? Grickstall whispered back. Local predators. Jake replied. They're probably investigating our fire and the smell of food. As long as we don't threaten them or act like prey, they might leave us alone. But the creatures didn't leave. Instead, they began moving closer to the shelter, testing for weaknesses. One of them started clawing at the entrance Jake had built. They're not going away, Professor Kelvin said quietly. Jake was already moving. He had quietly gathered several makeshift weapons, sharp sticks, rocks, and his knife. If they attack, we need to make ourselves look dangerous, not like easy prey. Predators usually don't want to fight if they think they might get hurt. The largest creature suddenly lunged at the shelter entrance. Jake met it with a spear he had crafted from local materials, driving it back with a sharp jab to its snout. The creature snarled and backed away, but it didn't retreat. Everyone grab something to fight with, Jake ordered. Form a circle with your backs together. Make noise, yell, bang rocks together, whatever you can do. Zeph had never been in a fight in his life. On Vraxia Prime, violence was almost unknown. But he picked up a large rock and stood with the others, as Jake had instructed. The predators attacked together, coming from multiple directions at once. Jake moved like he had trained for this his entire life, using his improvised weapons to drive them back while coordinating the group's defense. Aim for their faces and front legs, Jake called out as he blocked one creature's attack. Don't try to kill them. Just make them decide we're too much trouble. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours to Zeph. The creatures were fast and dangerous, but Jake's strategy worked. After taking several painful hits from the group's desperate defense, the predators decided to find easier prey elsewhere. As the creatures disappeared into the darkness, everyone stood breathing heavily. Several people had minor injuries, but no one was seriously hurt. Is everyone okay? Jake asked, checking on each person. How did you know how to do that? Zeph asked. How did you know exactly what would make them leave? Predator behavior is similar across most worlds, Jake replied. They're looking for easy food, not a dangerous fight. If you can convince them that attacking you will cost them more energy than they'll gain, they'll usually look for something else to hunt. Have you fought creatures like that before? Velko asked. I've had encounters with bears, mountain lions, and wolves on Earth, Jake said. The principles are the same. Show that you're not helpless, but don't corner them or make them feel like they have to fight to survive. Professor Kelvin was taking notes on his surviving recording device. Mr. Miller, your knowledge of cross-species predator behavior is remarkable. Where did you learn this? It's just basic wilderness survival, Jake replied. Any human who spends time in dangerous areas learns this stuff. It's not really special knowledge. But Zeph knew it was special. Jake had just saved all their lives using skills that he considered basic. The human had calmly faced down a pack of alien predators using nothing but improvised weapons and an understanding of universal behavior patterns. As they settled back into their shelter for the remainder of the night, Zeph found himself looking at Jake with new respect. The rescue shuttle landed with a soft hum of engines. Zeph had never been so happy to see advanced technology in his life. The rescue team emerged wearing full environmental suits and carrying medical scanners. Is everyone accounted for? The team leader asked Professor Kelvin. All present and in good condition, thanks to Mr. Miller's expertise, the professor replied. The rescue team looked confused. They had expected to find desperate survivors barely clinging to life on the Class 13 world. Instead, they found an organized camp with clean water, adequate shelter, and everyone in relatively good health. How long were you stranded? The medic asked as she scanned the group for injuries. 3 days, Jake replied. 3 days on Kepler 438c with minimal equipment, and you're all in this good condition? The medic looked at her readings again. That's remarkable. As they loaded onto the shuttle, Zeph noticed that Jake seemed almost disappointed to be leaving. While everyone else was eager to get back to safety and comfort, Jake was looking back at their improvised camp with something like nostalgia. Will you miss it? Zeph asked. Parts of it, Jake admitted. It was challenging, but there's something satisfying about solving problems with your own hands and basic tools. It reminds you what you're capable of. A flight back to the university gave Zeph time to think about everything that had happened. In 3 days, he had seen Jake handle every crisis with calm competence. Equipment failures, extreme weather, predator attacks, being stranded, none of it had seemed to truly surprise or overwhelm the human. When they arrived at the university, word of their survival had already spread. Students and faculty gathered to hear about their experience on the Class 13 world. Jake seemed uncomfortable with the attention. It really wasn't that big a deal, Jake kept saying. We just used basic survival techniques. But everyone else knew it was a big deal. Survival on a Class 13 world for 3 days, with minimal equipment, was almost unheard of for most species. The fact that they had done it with no casualties and relatively little suffering was extraordinary. A week later, Zeph was invited to present his findings to the Galactic University's board of directors. He had spent the time since their return researching human survival capabilities and Earth's classification as a death world. Honored directors, Zeph began his presentation. I would like to share what I learned about human survival capabilities during our mission to Kepler 438c. He activated a holographic display showing the various challenges they had faced. During our time on the Class 13 world, we experienced equipment failures, extreme weather conditions, seismic activity, and predator attacks. In each case, the human student Jake Miller provided solutions using what he called basic survival skills. The directors listened with growing interest as Zeph described Jake's techniques. Many of the methods seemed primitive by galactic standards, but they had proven more reliable than advanced technology. What makes this particularly significant, Zeph continued, is that Mr. Miller considers his abilities to be ordinary by human standards. He learned these skills as a normal part of growing up on Earth. One of the directors, an elderly Vrexian like Zeph, raised her hand. Are you suggesting that all humans possess these capabilities? Based on my research, yes, Zeph replied. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, which means that basic survival skills are necessary for daily life. What we consider extraordinary emergency techniques, humans consider normal childhood education. Zeph showed data he had gathered about Earth's environment. Humans regularly live in conditions that would be classified as Class 8 or Class 9 environments by our standards. They do this not with advanced technology, but with knowledge and skills passed down through generations. What are the implications of this? Another director asked. I believe humans may be the most naturally capable survival specialists in the galaxy, Zeph said. Their entire species has been shaped by millions of years of evolution on one of the most dangerous worlds known. This gives them capabilities that our advanced civilizations have never needed to develop. The presentation caused quite a stir. Within days, Zeph was contacted by researchers from across the galaxy who wanted to study human survival techniques. The Galactic Survival Institute requested that humans be invited to teach courses on emergency preparedness. Jake was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. I don't understand why everyone thinks this is so special, he told Zeph. I'm just a geology student who likes camping. That is exactly why it is special, Zeph replied. You are a normal human who can do things that seem impossible to the rest of us. The university decided to establish a new program studying human survival techniques. Jake was offered a position as an instructor, despite being just a student himself. I'm not qualified to teach survival to aliens, Jake protested. I barely know how to survive on my own world. But that is more qualification than anyone else in the galaxy has, Professor Kelvin pointed out. You have practical experience with techniques that work on any world. Eventually, Jake agreed to help develop the curriculum. His first lesson was attended by over 200 students from dozens of species, all eager to learn from the Deathworld specialist. The most important thing to understand about survival, Jake began his first lecture, is that technology can fail, but knowledge stays with you. Everything I'm going to teach you is based on techniques humans have used for thousands of years. Zeph watched from the audience with pride. His friend had gone from being just another student to being recognized as a representative of humanity's unique capabilities. After the lecture, Jake approached Zeph. I've been thinking about what you said about humans being special because of our Deathworld background. Yes, I want to invite you to visit Earth, Jake said. I think you should see what human normal actually looks like. Zeph felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Is that safe? Earth is a Class 12 Deathworld. Jake laughed. We'll start you off easy. Maybe a camping trip in one of the safer national parks. You can experience what I consider a relaxing vacation. What you consider relaxing, I will probably consider terrifying, Zeph replied. Probably, Jake agreed. But I think you'll find it educational. And don't worry, I'll make sure you're prepared. As they walked through the university corridors, Zeph reflected on how much had changed since that first day in Professor Kelvin's class. He had started the semester afraid of the Deathworld species and ended it with a deep respect for human capabilities. Jake, Zeph said, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think humans will ever lose these survival skills as your technology becomes more advanced? Jake considered this carefully. I hope not. My father always said that the skills that kept humans alive for millions of years don't become useless just because we invented better tools. Technology makes life easier, but it doesn't change the fact that sometimes you need to rely on yourself. That is a very human way of thinking, Zeph observed. What do you mean? Most species see technology as a replacement for primitive skills. Humans seem to see it as an addition to those skills. Jake nodded. Maybe that's because we remember what it was like before we had advanced technology. We know that everything we've built could disappear, and we'd still need to survive. As they reached their dormitory, Zeph realized that he had learned much more than survival techniques during their time on Kepler 438c. He had learned about resilience, preparation, and the kind of thinking that allowed an entire species to thrive in conditions that would destroy others. I will take you up on your offer to visit Earth, Zeph said. but I want to learn as much as I can before I go." "Good idea," Jake replied. "We'll start with the basics. How to make fire, find water, build shelter. The same things humans have been teaching their children for thousands of years." Zeph smiled. 6 months ago, the idea of learning primitive survival skills would have seemed pointless. Now he understood that these skills represented something much more important. They were the foundation of human strength and adaptability. As he entered his room, Zeph began planning his request to the university for an extended study program on Earth. He wanted to understand not just how humans survived, but how they had developed the mindset that made survival possible. He suspected that understanding humanity's relationship with danger and adversity might be one of the most important things the galaxy could learn. After all, in a universe full of unexpected dangers, having friends who considered Class 13 worlds to be interesting camping trips could be very valuable indeed. The semester was ending, but Zeph's real education about humans was just beginning. And he couldn't wait to see what other, ordinary capabilities his human friends might reveal.